Welcome back, guys, to another episode of BDE.
Chuckless?
That's right. Mark, how are you, man?
What a week for Chuck to be taking a much needed and well-deserved break, right?
No doubt. It's been, it's been a really humbling week. And we're going to jump in to the Charlie Kirk assassination because I think it's, for all of us in the podcast world, we use words versus fists. And what is your reaction, Mark? Let's talk about just, where were you? What were you thinking when you heard the news? What does it mean to you? What does it mean to our listeners?
I was at home. Home right now is coincidentally Phoenix area, which is where Charlie lived. And I didn't know that until last night. I'm not there right now. And I was just walking past. It was almost like one of those moments where I remember I was at the Houstonian after a physical, standing in the men's locker room, tying my tie when I learned about 9/11. And it was one of those just double take moments of just slowly kind of realizing what was happening. And it took a minute.
Yeah.
And so, of course, the era today where we've got recordings and video in the moment in real time of everything makes that different. But it felt to me like one of those moments that kind of took me back to something as I don't know, transformational or impactful as just that moment for me personally when I first learned of what was going on in New York on 9/11, which was yesterday, the 24th anniversary.
Yeah,
where were you?
I don't know if timing. I was at home in Nantucket, and it was kind of just like, holy crap, everything has changed, possibly. And I was thinking it in context of 9/11 because our own fearless leader, Colin McClellan, I saw his tweet about Charlie Kirk, and he's like, I'm standing up against this no longer. And I was thinking, and I think I replied to his X post, I guess I can't say tweet anymore, but his X post saying, can I say that?
You can.
But it really impacted me. I'm like, 9/11 was 24 years ago. And in that short period, we're now electing the same people that have the same beliefs that want to destroy this country. And now these same people that hate us and want to destroy this very fabric of this country are now being elected as our leaders across the country. So that's 24 years. And conservatives by nature are not people that are easily radicalized. And usually that's because, and going to Charlie Kirk himself, like most of us have some fundamental religious beliefs. We believe in a God, someone better, something that we're a part of that is bigger than ourselves. Politics is not religion. It's not that important. It's important, but it's not the fabric of how we see and view life. We believe in the human soul. And the soul is something that's bigger than these things. And so we're not easily radicalized. So I'm like, is it really a turning point? Because we as conservatives don't rise up with violence. We rise up with words. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens. And of all people, Charlie represented the best of humanity, where he would go into places using words, trying to convince people. And he saw people as humans, not as objects. It reminds me of C.S. Lewis when he talked about the abolition of man. when we stop treating our opponents as humans worthy of debate and start treating them as enemies to be eliminated. Charlie Kirk actually spoke about this, about he looked at people. And I went back and I've been spending the last few days hoping we talk about it in mourning in some ways, reviewing Charlie's work. And I mean, what a great human being, where he told the crowd, like, let's respect these people. And people that hated Charlie, he would debate them. He would look them in the eyes. He'd treat them as a human being and try to convince them otherwise.
Well, and it was always, I want people in the crowd who disagree with me to go to the front of the line, because I want to engage in this debate. And I think one of the more powerful tenets or principles or messages was, look, bad things happen often when we stop talking. In a marriage, divorce happens. In global conflict, wars happen. And so the notion that you engage and talk, I think, is foundational to certainly what, the First Amendment is the First Amendment, not by coincidence. The founders saw that as the cornerstone and bedrock to our society, civilization, and system of government, backed up by the Second Amendment. And so the other thing is, I'm paraphrasing, I don't remember it precisely. Killing me doesn't prove me wrong. It only adds more weight to my opinion. And I think, I do think that's true. Did I agree with everything that came out of Charlie Kirk's mouth? No. Do I agree with everything that comes out of President Trump's mouth? No. We're going to talk about a few things as it relates to our own, I think, direct experience with, attempts at shouting down points of view and silencing debate. Energy and climate are certainly two of the most politically charged and intertwined issues and topics of debate and discussion, where there has been, signs of violent type rebuttals to an argument being made, or silencing. Right? We've experienced de facto some level of that. Like, it seemed like every other week a few years ago, we were getting footnoted and maybe shadow banned by YouTube whenever we talked about climate.
Yeah. I mean, 100%, Mark. I mean, since COVID, and then the Black Lives Matter movement and all the riots and these things where people were afraid to speak up. I mean, think about us, and I hate to say it, that we're middle-aged white guys, but we have been the most oppressed lately, afraid to speak up because, anybody in our age range is not getting a job. People don't want to hire us. We're seen around the world as the most privileged and not worthy of much. But Charlie defended man in general. It's interesting to see, and it's interesting to see what has happened with social media and the fact that all these people that have been celebrating his assassination are being called out and they're getting fired. I mean, that's a great thing about free speech, is that free speech still has consequences. Like, I can say something horrific, but if my employer doesn't like it and it's not part of their code of conduct or their standards, they have every right to hold me accountable to that. Amen, right? That's the greatest thing about it. It's like, hey, free speech does come with consequences, but at least you're still alive and breathing. And that's the one thing I think Charlie said very eloquently about the power of free speech. And I'm actually curious, and I've been watching this take place on social media, is all these people celebrating assassination, which tells you a lot about the depravity of man in general. But
it's ghoulish, that's for sure. Look, I think back to your original point, if you're involved in podcast type media that's opinion oriented, I've always approached it, and I just have an analyst DNA. That's how I'm wired. That's how you're wired. And I've never approached it as I'm going to tell you what to think. I'm going to, from a position of interest, curiosity, and analysis, show you how I think about something based on, hopefully, a chain of critical thinking and a synthesis and understanding of objective data to the extent that you have the insight and the expertise, which I would argue that both of us do, and Chuck as well, to speak from a credible position of expertise in the subject matter that we typically find ourselves discussing, which is the subject matter of energy and specifically oil and gas, which has been kind of the pariah politically over the last 5 to 10 years for a lot of reasons. And wanting to rebut in the debate some of the, sometimes not well-supported arguments to the whole, subject matter of energy and oil and gas. But to have things like, I'll use an example from this past week. Chris Wright assembled the Climate Assessment Working Group. And they spent a couple of months. There were 5 PhD level scientists working on that. And of course, they're immediately upon publishing their findings, there was a vast body of quote unquote mainstream opinion scientists, many of whom participated in the latest IPCC. I saw in this article that I sent around with the Run a Show, which said, and there's all kinds of qualifiers handpicked by DOE Secretary Chris Wright, a fossil fuel entrepreneur. Authors are well known to climate scientists. And then it says they hold contrarian views on climate and sciences that are science that are out of step with the mainstream. And there's a lot more in that article, and we'll send that around. But the notion that this is it all decided, and the attempts to immediately tamp down any type of debate and rebuttal is still alive and well. And so they shut this working group down on threat, or actually lawsuits that were filed on some violation of the Federal Advisory Act. I guess you cross a line in terms of assembling things that are advising government agencies. I don't know the technical kind of legalities of all that, but the Trump administration disbanded that. And I think this group is going to continue to work independently, which, I think it's needed in this particular area. And all of this comes on the heels of, or in concert with, the EPA's notion that they're going to try and repeal the endangerment finding as it relates to CO2. So anyway.
Good points.
It's still very much alive and well, where, the notion of something as scientifically complex, chaotic, and uncertain as anything in physical energy systems, you multiply that by orders of magnitude when you're talking about understanding the atmosphere and climate, and yet we pretty much know everything. It's already been scientifically agreed upon in the mainstream. Well, predictions that are out decades based on incomplete and flawed modeling taken as fact is, I think, for anyone with a scientific or an analytical background objectively is ludicrous. But there was a period of time, it's becoming easier to voice an opinion on that based on counterfactuals that, this thing is subject to much more study and debate. And when the stakes are as high as they are, we talked about the endangerment finding essentially catalyzing like $1 trillion over the decade plus that it's been in place in compliance and other costs. Those are meaningful things that need to be thoroughly and objectively studied and debated. And that debate shouldn't be truncated by, political fear.
I mean, I felt that directly at Shell. I mean, C.S. Lewis, going back, talked about, quote, what he called the inner ring. The desire to be part of the approved group that leads people to abandon their principles. And we're seeing this play out in climate science where dissent equals career suicide. And finally, I mean, that's my biggest concern. I mean, remember, peak oil demand narrative is the latest orthodoxy. If you question it, you're labeled a denier. And we're still following religious doctrine. And going back to Charlie for a second and coming back over is people are now afraid because violence, people are celebrating violence. And someone my wife follows, and I actually think she's actually, I don't know if you know who Blair White is. She's a conservative. She was a man that transitioned to a woman. She's against it. She'll tell people, but she's a conservative, and she just wrote something on Twitter. I thought that was really interesting. It says, if you laugh at or celebrate rape, I'm going to assume you're capable of rape. If you laugh at or celebrate murder, I'm going to assume you're capable of murder. What Ben Shapiro originally said after Charlie Kirk, saying, I'm not going to college campuses anymore. But he's come back saying, I'm going, we cannot let this happen. But the fear, this is sort of proven to many of us, like, man, it's not safe for us to talk about these things. Because if we do, because we're just inviting violence against us. But I think maybe we should speak up.
Well, Shapiro said he was actually, in retrospect, was going to rev it up in terms of doing it.
In retrospect.
I took that as more frequently and more pointedly in engaging and picking up the mantle of what Charlie was about. And, it's so ironic that this took place on what you and I both came to know growing up as the bastion of the free exchange of ideas and opinions, and that is a college campus. And it's, as we've seen in the last few years, it's become the antithesis of that, unless it's a certain point of view.
Well, I've been, I've sort of stuck my nose in places I shouldn't, but I've been sticking my nose. I watched the 2 hours that Charlie Kirk was at Oxford. And I don't know if you've been following this, but President-elect George Aberoni, I don't know how to say his last name, but he debated Charlie back in May when Charlie was at Oxford. And he's the president-elect of what's known as the Oxford Union. And so I, of course, stick my nose in it. And I wrote in response, he basically celebrated Charlie's assassination. And the Oxford Union is this, it's Harold Macmillan, former UK Prime Minister and ex-librarian of the Oxford Union, once described it as, quote, the last bastion of free speech in the Western world. So I wrote that, and I said, how embarrassing and far the union has fallen from an institution that championed debate and intellectual curiosity to one whose president-elect celebrates violence against the opposition. Now, I don't know if you're watching this, but I'm seeing a lot of people are challenging George on, number one, like, this is inappropriate, this is wrong. But secondly, they're going after that he didn't have great grades to get into Oxford, and they're challenging the DEI narrative, which was actually one of Charlie's speaking points, because he thought DEI is ridiculous because you're just lowering the bar. Meritocracy should be how it is, which goes right into climate change. It's like if you at Shell, definitely can't say even within, people are like, well, Shell's an oil and gas company. It's pretty progressive at the top, and you can't really talk about it. And but that's true across energy. It's like it's sitting on a powder keg. You couldn't talk about it, but finally, I think this is the moment in time where people are starting to speak up and speak their mind and challenge. Now, there might be violence around the corner, but I think that's what's interesting is we're seeing George, who just a year ago you couldn't say anything about him, but now people are like, he shouldn't even be at Oxford. Like, there's people, former Oxford graduates, that across the world are saying this is bullshit. And before, I bet you they would never have said that before.
Oxford came out with an official statement denouncing it. I've got a, totally condemning those statements that George made. We'll see. We'll see if he remains. We'll see if he remains president-elect of the union.
Yeah, they stood within 6 feet of each other, talking like human beings. I mean, and then this one guy's celebrating. Like, he said, "Let's fucking go," I think is what he said. I'm like, what? This is the mindset. Now, let's apply it to oil and gas. I mean, Mark, do you see this being a turning point where we can actually be honest about what's really happening?
Yeah, with a caveat, and this was as recently as maybe a year and a half ago. I won't. I'll keep this anonymous, but I have a friend who's fairly prominent in policy commentary circles who was invited to speak at one of the Ivies in one of these student forums, and it was more careers and energy type oriented. And we had recently seen, I don't remember the exact specifics, but there had been some activists and demonstrators get close to the stage where oil and gas executives were speaking. And so there was a threat, perceived physical threat as a result of those incidents. And this person reached out to me and asked kind of the advisability of showing up for this event, ostensibly to talk about mostly finance careers in oil and gas was really that. But it coincided with a lot of what was going on at the time across the Ivy League and some other universities as it relates to the whole Palestinian protest, for example. And he shared with me one piece of data that there had been an abnormal spike in the number of registrants for this event. And so I asked him questions about, is there, what's the setup? What's the physical setup? And I said, is there a screening and a check-in process? And to his knowledge, there wasn't any kind of special security considerations. And so, I basically said I wouldn't do it. I'd reschedule it if we can answer all these questions and make sure that those protections are in place. Because the environment was, there was evidence out there that, you see these interesting trends, if you will, of like this big spike in registration for an ordinary or otherwise mundane topic. And you look at how supercharged the environment was just politically, not just related to energy, but one of the most emotional and politically charged dimensions of debate is certainly climate and energy. And so that was very front of mind at the time. And then you think more recently what happened, to the CEO of United Healthcare. He was attending an investor conference and got assassinated. So in light of what happened this week and the prominence of it, I don't know. I wouldn't blame any, certainly corporate executive, from either taking extra measures or carefully choosing their place and time at which they want to speak and offer their opinions.
I mean, I've been watching this in real time with the wind farm off in Nantucket South Shore, and no one spoke up until a blade fell in the water, and that started to get some of the environmentalists talking. But the policy just think about the policy damage from the fear of being canceled over the last 5 to 10 years has been enormous. I mean, scientists self-censoring, researchers avoiding certain topics, entire fields of inquiry becoming off limits. I mean, as an investor inside of Shell and before Shell, so I was way on to my investment days in energy, but one of the areas that I have been banging the drum and made investments in is in exploration. And people are like, no. I'm like, wait a minute. Good investors can be contrarian and you run towards areas that are off limits. But I'm like, think about this. The world's, and remember, I don't know if do you remember this 10 years ago about the 9 billion people becoming, or it was a 9 or 10 billion on the planet. The amount of energy, like we don't have enough energy, water, food. What are we going to do? All this stuff. I'm like, if energy truly is growing based purely on population growth, we need more oil and gas. It's a no-brainer. Like there's renewables physically can't be built fast enough. The technology is not even close to being there. We're in trouble if we don't find more sources of oil and gas. So exploration has been going down this whole time. All the big national oil companies are not even that good at exploration because they don't need to be. So the international oil and gas companies have been deprioritizing exploration. So what do you think is going to happen when you have underinvestment? No one's exploring to that degree. Technology's not moving forward. You're going to have a challenge of supply and demand. So anyway, but that's been an area that's been in many ways way off topic, because if you look at the budgets of Exxon, of Shell's, I know internally Shell's, it was going like this. People didn't want to be in exploration. I want to be in wind.
We're at about run rate, I think it's a third of where we were in 2013. And keep in mind, the vast majority of this exploration expenditure is on long cycle conventional. And so the impacts of success or failure, spending or not spending, take about a decade to manifest. And so we're kind of at that point post contemporary peak of 2013. I believe 2013 was the milepost for peak in exploration spending, and it has come down dramatically over the ensuing dozen years or so. And I think that's why you see, look, Exxon and Guyana. Oh, and we talked about it either last week or the week before. Now we've got a big exploration agreement in Trinidad. And if I'm thinking, peak demand is somehow going to happen before the end of this decade, I'm not committing billions of dollars in long cycle capital to something that is allegedly going to be significantly reduced in demand. And that's just not reality. I think the reality is, and we've talked about it, others have talked about it, is that we're adding close to 2 billion people between now and 2050. And all of those people are going to be in the developing world, and a large concentration are in about 5 countries in Africa.
Check my math on this, but if you take the growth numbers, that's equivalent to a city the size of Austin, about 1 million people, popping up once a month. I mean, the brain doesn't even compute that. Like, how does that happen? But that's if the math is correct.
Well, and the point, I think the defining point or the anchor point of all that Arjun Murti has been talking about is we have to solve for everyone's right and aspiration to improve their standard of living. Full stop. Before we have a climate priority.
What's number one rule of doing that? Cheap, affordable, reliable energy.
Yep.
And we would love it to be clean, but if I'm starving to death, I'm burning wood. I don't care what it does to my lungs. Like, I just don't care. Like, I'm going to freeze to death, or I'm not going to be able to eat. So, like, you throw your standards out the window when you're surviving.
I had I'll just recount this anecdote again anonymously, but a very prominent global political figure who in their post-political life was spending a lot of time in Africa. And in a private conversation, we were talking about, climate change and this person's views. And he said, I spend a lot of time on the ground there. And the average person I encountered is more absorbed and consumed with, on a daily basis, surviving, not only for him or herself, but for their family, and improving their quality of life and standard of living. And the punchline was, that guy doesn't give a shit about climate change. And that's reality. But you couldn't say that. You couldn't say it certainly at the prominence of the level this individual held in the political stratosphere. And so one of the other points that getting back to the whole free speech and expression of opinion and debate, I think there's been a significant amount of policy damage done over the last 5 to 10 years because there has been such aggression to silence points of view and debate and ill-informed policy decisions. Like, I think one of the worst things that an institution that should be about objective policy leadership and advisory, and I've talked about it a lot in the CIEA, published that absurd report in May of 2021, net zero by 2050, which to the uninitiated said, well, we can just stop investing to the point we were talking about earlier. We can just stop investing in new resources in oil and gas, exploration and future development. Well, here we are. And, if OPEC is right, that it's 123 million barrels a day, or if the IEA, which has now said we have a scenario that's based on prevailing policy, I think they came out this week or last week. Javier Blas tweeted about it. I'll go look that up. But basically suggesting that we're going to land somewhere around 115 million barrels a day. Well, we're at 105 today? Doesn't sound like we're going to get there in terms of peak, or certainly a rollover in demand globally and inside of 2030.
So Mark, we have, taking this back to oil and gas and drill baby drill versus the layoff reality. What's happening in the US? This is interesting.
Well, I think about this as a point of, we're not just mindlessly in lockstep with one political point of view. And we talked about this before the election, when the campaign was hot on the topic of drill, baby, drill. And I've commented on it and written about it. There is a short-term political motivation to be able to show the American consumer, which is by far more important constituent in the electorate, that we're going to, by whatever means necessary, get gasoline prices down, for example. And so, but the reality is you're doing structural damage to the domestic oil and gas industry. And that is most pronounced in the area of generational succession. But we've attached an article, I think it was in Reuters, and it just tallies up all of the numbers in the last, call it 9, 12 months of all the players, and to the extent that they've published data or released data on how many layoffs have occurred, the numbers are in the thousands. And this is on top of what has occurred over the course of the past 5 to 10 years. And, what does that do to the generational succession of being an oil and gas professional and then ultimately taking over leadership with some of the best and the brightest that we have?
Well, taking this personally, first of all, I went to the University of Texas, go Horns. I was there when the petroleum engineering department was merging with another engineering department. It was becoming like, it's not even important because I went to school in 1990. And that's when oil and gas was in the shitter. But guys my age, some of them are billionaires because they decided to go in when no one else wanted to go in. So this means opportunity. But I love West Texas, and I went to school with and you did too, over at A&M, with quite a few people from West Texas in the oil business. And what's interesting is they don't care about campaign slogans. All they care about is supply, demand, and return on investment. Amen. What is that the American dream or what? As a capitalist, no one says it. If you just watch what happens in Midland, that will tell you what happens in the rest of the world. They will not invest if oil prices are in the shitter. It doesn't make economic sense for them to do it. So that's what's so interesting. So what's the solution here, Mark?
Well, physics is the solution. As it always is. If the predictions of we're going to see a meaningful effect show up of from our lack of exploration spending, here we go again.
Oh, and same goes for as we talk about the great generational crew change, which seems to never happen. But young people have been told for a decade that fossil fuels are evil, so they don't want to go into the industry. So it's been a DEI reverse. Like, people are not the best and brightest, don't want to go into energy because they've been told it's bad. So they're going to other places. So that's a reverse challenge. How are we going to recruit the best and brightest? Opportunity. Hey, young people, if you're listening, great time. It's a great time to get into energy.
I would agree. And, there are so many other dimensions and extensions of a career in energy as we think about, the thing that we've been talking about. I'm sure there are a number of upstream professionals who have parlayed their careers into, hey, what about this power demand? And a lot of it's going to be gas fired. I want to get more capability and expertise in that. Or, like we're doing at Collide, which is you've got to have the subject matter expertise alongside the analytics and data science and architecture to really make an impact in like enterprise AI in a very deep and technically sophisticated and complex domain like oil and gas. And that's not going to end in my or your lifetime. We're just getting started.
No.
And probably not our kids or grandkids.
A little bit of like, I think I read Omnivore's Dilemma. I think it was that book 15 years ago, but it basically, but it's like the food. I was thinking about the agriculture, and we're being told that entire generation believes that farming's immoral, and then wondering why food gets expensive. I read this cool book. I think it's Omnivore's Dilemma, maybe not, but it talked about this one farmer that realized that if you farm old school, like you treat the land, and he calls himself like a grass farmer. Like, you take care of the grass, you bring the chickens in to pick the worms, they poop, and then you spread the poop around, and you bring the pigs in and all whatever. But he created an ecosystem on one farm, and he moved. He didn't farm the same plot. He would let the land rest, and he kept trees for oxygen. But the nutrients in the land and everything just became better and better and better. And I think the farm's in Virginia or whatever. But he showed people a pathway of how to do sustainable farming correctly. And it's harder, and you can't mass produce. But if everyone was doing that, it would change a lot. If everyone could farm locally and create highly dense nutrients food, it works.
Think how much healthier we'd be.
Look at it. If we could just change systematically the process, I think that will change a lot. Now, that takes a lot of courage, and there's people out there demonstrating, but same with oil and gas. People have to demonstrate success, and we have that. We just have to, the challenge is we just need to continue speaking up. Speaking of, I do want to talk about what's going on at A&M, man. There's some great, I love watching this shit show, especially being at Longhorn, which is the greatest university in Texas. Let's just be honest.
And Travis County.
Sorry, Chuck. But we have too many progressives, and Austin's weird. And when I think of A&M, and I love A&M, I love to beat them, but I like the Aggies. They're conservative. They're good people. But man, there's a shit show brewing over in College Station. What's happening? Give us a lowdown.
We'll see. Well, state representative, I believe his name is Brian Harrison, got wind of a controversy in one of the colleges. Forget the specific name of the college under which education is housed. And in a children's literature discussion or course in this degree program, the professor was apparently veering off course into, gender ideology. And a student challenged this professor in class, and it's on videotape, and then elevated her opposition to this deviation from what was advertised in the course material to the president of the university. And there was an investigation. Apparently the chancellor got involved, and ultimately I believe the professor was fired, maybe the department head. And I haven't kept current over the last couple of days, but the state representative is not letting it go. General Welsh, Mark Welsh, who's the president of Texas A&M, is in a bit of a sticky wicket because there's some audio tape of conversations between he and the student that don't seem to sync up on the timeline of how this went down. And so the lieutenant governor I saw got involved yesterday and tweeted about it. It's really up to you guys as a private institute, or as the Board of Regents and the leadership of the university to make a decision on the president's future. But I think we can all kind of read between the lines here that they're out for blood as it relates to to the whole scandal here. And
about time, don't you think?
yeah, look, if and I know that there has been an order to review the entirety of course descriptions and curriculum across the university, because there's, it's dishonest to deviate from what's in a course description. When a student looks at the course catalog, this is what I'm going to take, this is my degree program, this is what I fundamentally expect. And if there's a significant deviation from that based on, whatever the political agenda is, in this case it was transgender ideology, then that needs to be addressed and not allowed. But cynical reality is that this is alive and well in the academic community, and
so this is not going on in the A&M's prestigious petroleum engineering department.
For somehow I don't think so. And I spent time with a group of students back in May in a capstone course judging some projects, and in a lot of ways it felt very similar culturally and ideologically to when I was there many, many years ago. I think we need to try and avoid the temptation to ramp up the gotcha scoring of political points on both sides. And let's honor the spirit and memory of Charlie Kirk by thoughtfully and dispassionately engaging in objective debate without threats.
Well said.
Like I said at the outset, again, paraphrasing or borrowing, when people stop talking, bad things often happen.
As Charlie said, we are not just economic units or political pawns. We are souls created in the image of God with inherent dignity and worth that no government can grant nor take away.
And I think that's a good one to close on.
Great seeing you, Mark.
Great to see you, Chuck. We missed you. Have a good weekend. Thanks for watching. Give us a like. Appreciate you spending the time with us, and we'll talk to you next week.